Good morning. Let's dive right into chapter 3 of The Black Pearl. Oops, let's go ahead and find chapter 3 of The Black Pearl. Almost there. Here we are. All right, chapter 3. There were 5 boats in our fleet. Each was about 20 feet long and broad beamed, with a high prow and stern like a canoe, and a small square sail. They were built on the beach of our town, but the wood came from the mahogany forests of Mazatlan. Each was named after a saint, and all were painted blue, the blue of the sea where the water is very deep. Each boat carried 4 or 5 men. On our boat, the Santa Teresa, there were, besides my father and myself, an Indian and a young man named Gaspar Ruiz. This Ruiz had come to our town about a month before from Seville in Spain, or so he said, and therefore we called him the Seviano. He was tall, and his shoulders were so wide and powerful that they seemed to be armored in steel instead of muscles. His hair, which was gold-colored, grew thick on his head, like a helmet. He had blue eyes, so blue and handsome that any girl would have envied them. His face was handsome too, except that around his mouth there always lurked the shadow of a sneer. Besides this, nowhere on the Vermilion Sea could you find a better diver for pearls than Gaspar Ruiz. There were some who could stay underwater for longer than 2 minutes, but the Seviano, 3 minutes was easy dive. And once, when he had to hide from a large gray shark, he was down 4 minutes and came up laughing. He also was a great braggart about the things he had done in Spain and elsewhere. Not only did he brag about these things, but many of them were tattooed on his body. There was a picture in red and green and black. There was a picture in red and green and black ink of Gaspar Ruiz fighting an octopus that had a dozen tentacles. Another showed him thrusting a long sword into a charging bull. Still another showed him choking a mountain lion to death with his bare hands. These scenes were tattooed on his shoulders and arms, and even on his legs, so that he looked very much like a picture gallery walking around. We had not sailed far that night before the Seviano began to talk about himself. He sat with his back against the mast and told a long story of how he had once dived in the Gulf of Persia, and there found a pearl bigger than a hen's egg. "What did you do with it?" my father asked. "I sold it to the Shah." "For much money?" "Much," said the Seviano. "So much that I bought a pearling fleet of my own. It was larger than yours. Today I would be a rich man if it had not foundered in a bad storm." The Seviano went on to tell about the storm, which must have been the greatest ever seen in the world, and how he saved his own life and the lives of his crew. Before I became a partner with my father, sometimes I used to see him on the beach when the boats went out or when they came in, sometimes in the plaza. He always had a group around him, listening to his tales, but somehow I felt that he was talking to me more than to the others. Once, when I questioned him, in fun, about one of these tales that I knew to be a lie, he turned on me. "You do not believe that I tell the truth?" he said, clenching his teeth. Before I could answer, picture the Seviano. He said, "You are the son of a rich man, and you live in a big house, and you eat good food, and all your life you have done little, nor will you ever do more." Too surprised to speak, I was silent. He watched me for a moment, and then took a step toward me and lowered his voice. "Your father is a rich man. My father was a poor man whose name I do not know. From the time I could walk, I have done something in my life. I have done many things, and what I have done I talk about truthfully. So guard your tongue, mate." I mumbled an apology and walked away. But when he thought I was out of hearing, I heard him say to his friends, "That one who just left us? Have you noticed the red hair that sticks up on his head like a comb of a rooster? Well, that comes from Africa. It is from the infidel blood of Moors and Berbers." I was about to turn around and confront him. He was older than I, and stronger, and he carried a knife in his belt. But it was not this that held me back. I knew that my father would think it an insult to the Salazar name for me to start a brawl in a public place, no matter what the cause. So I swallowed my pride, and I walked on as if I had not heard. I said nothing to my father about this encounter, and afterward, when I met the Seviano, I said nothing to him. I acted as if I did not remember what he had said to me or what I had overheard. When I became a partner in the firm, and he would come to the office to get his pay, I acted no differently. Yet I had not forgotten the encounter, nor, I am sure, had he. On this night, as we sailed out of the harbor, and he sat and told the tall tale about the storm and his rescuing the whole crew of his pearling fleet, I felt that he was talking to me more than to the others. I felt that he was trying to goad me into saying something, as I had said before, so that he could make me uncomfortable in front of my father. I therefore listened and kept silent. We reached the pearling beds at dawn and anchored the 5 boats in a cluster over a reef where the shells grew. Everything was new to me. I had heard many stories of the pearling beds since the time I was old enough to listen, from my father and grandfather, and from my friends who were the sons of pearlers. But to be really there on the sea, with the sun coming up in a coppery haze, and watch the men slip out of the boats into water clear as air, was to me part of a long dream come true. My father showed me how to pull up the basket when it was full, and how to stack the shells in the boat. Then he took the sink stone in one hand, carefully coiled the rope that was attached to it, and tied to the boat, picked up the basket and its rope, and went over the side. Down he went with a heavy stone until he reached the bottom. Through the clear water I watched him drop the stone, take the big knife from his belt, and start to pry the oyster shells from the rocks. When the basket was full, he gave a tug at the rope, and I pulled it up. A moment later he rose, trailing a stream of bubbles from his mouth, and I stacked the shells, as I had been told, and drew up the sink stone for the next dive. The Seviano had gone down before my father, and was still down as he dived again. When the Seviano came to the surface, he held onto the side of the boat and glanced up at me. "How does the work go?" he said. "I learn." "There is not much to learn, mate. You pull the shells up, and then sink the stone, and you stack the shells, and then you wait a while and do it all over again. It is work for children." He spoke softly and smiled, but I knew what he meant. "It would be fun to dive," I answered him. "More fun, mate, but more danger, too." He pointed to the arm he was resting on the gunwale. From his elbow to wrist ran a long, jagged scar, as if the arm had been pulled through the jaws of a steel trap. "This one," he said, "I got from a burro clam." I put my hand down deep into a crevice, and snap! It was not a crevice, but the mouth of a burro, the father of all burros. Senor Clam had me tight, but I did not leave my arm with him, as you can see. That was in the Gulf, yet there are many burros here in the Vermilion. He looked up at me again and smiled. "It is better, mate, that you stay in the boat." The Indian who was working with the Seviano handed him the sink stone, and the Seviano went down, saying nothing more to me. Nor did he speak to me again that morning. At midday, the Santa Teresa was loaded with shells. There's the diver going down the basket. In the water. Because the Seviano did the work of 3 divers, so my father sent him out to help in the other boats. From time to time during the afternoon, When he came up for air, he would call over to me, "Be careful, mate, and do not get your foot caught in the rope." Or, "There are sharks around, Senor Salazar. Mind that you do not fall in the water." Such things as that I had heard during the whole of the afternoon. My father also heard them, though the Seviano usually spoke to me when he thought my father was not listening. "He is a troublemaker," my father said. "But let him talk. What do you care what he says? Remember that he is the best gatherer of pearls we have, and it is for pearls that we are here on the sea, not for other reasons." By dark the boats were piled high with cargo, and we set sail for La Paz. The moon came up and a brisk wind that filled the sails. The Seviano was in good spirits, as if he had not made dozens of deep dives that day. He perched himself on the mound of shells, and once more told how he had found the great pearl in the Gulf of Persia. The same tale he had told before, but longer. Again, I had the feeling that his story was meant for me more than the others. And as I listened to him, a dream began to take shape in my mind. It was a fanciful dream that made me forget the insults that I had suffered silently. I saw myself in a boat anchored in a secret lagoon somewhere on the Vermilion Sea. I put a knife in my belt and grasped the belt and the heavy sinkstone and plunged to the bottom. There were sharks swimming around me in slow circles, but I gave no heed to them. I pried clump after clump of shells from the rocks, filling my basket. After I had been down for 3 or 4 minutes, I floated to the surface, through the circling sharks, and climbed into the boat and pulled up the basket. Then I pried open the shells, one after the other. Nothing. At last, there was only one shell left. Discouraged, I opened it and was about to toss it away when I saw before me a pearl larger than my fist that shone as if a fire burned inside. Right at that moment, just as I was about to clutch the pearl in my hand, the Seviano stopped talking. Suddenly he stood up on the mound and pointed astern, along the path the moon was making on the sea. "Manta!" he shouted. "Manta Diablo!" I jumped to my feet. I could see nothing at first. Then the boat rose on a wave, and I made out a silvery shape swimming half out of the water, not more than a furlong away. Truthfully, I must say that for all its beauty, the Manta is a fearsome sight to those who sail on our Vermilion Sea. There are small mantas, no larger when they are full grown than 10 feet from one wingtip to the other. But there are some that measure twice that length and weigh most of 3 tons. Both kinds are shaped very much like a giant bat, and they swim through the water with a regular upward and downward beat of their flippers. And both have a mouth so enormous that a man may easily put his head into it, and on either side of this maw are large lobes, like arms, which the manta pushes out and then draws in to capture its prey. Their prey, surprisingly, is not the shoals of fish that abound in our sea, but shrimp and crabs and such small things. Most of the mantas have a pilot fish that swims along beneath them. These fish swim in and out of their mouths, it is said, to clean up the pieces of food that catch in their plate-like teeth. And yet, for all his friendly ways, the manta is a fearsome beast. When aroused by some careless insult, it can break a man's neck with the flip of its long tail, or the lift of one flipper, and wreck the strongest boat. "Manta!" Seviano shouted again. "El Manta Diablo!" His Indian helper quickly scrambled away and crouched down in the bow of the boat and began to mutter to himself. "No," said my father, "it is not the Diablo. Him I have seen, and he is bigger by twice than this one." "Come where you can see better," said the Seviano. "It is the Manta Diablo. I know him well." I was certain that he was trying to scare the Indian, and my father was certain of it too, for he lashed the tiller and climbed to where the Seviano stood. He glanced astern for a moment, and then went back to the tiller. "No," he said, loud enough for the Indian to hear. It is not even the small sister of the Diablo. The Indian fell silent, but he was still frightened, and as I watched the Manta swimming along behind us, its outstretched fins like vast silvery wings, I remembered that once I had also been frightened at the very sound of the name. At last the Manta disappeared, and near dawn was rounded. At last the Manta disappeared, and near dawn we rounded El Magote, the lizard tongue of land that guards the harbor, and anchored our boats. As my father and I walked home in the moonlight, he said, "About the Seviano, let me repeat to you. Treat him with courtesy. Listen to his boasts as if you believe them, for he is a dangerous young man. Only last week I learned from a friend who lives over in Culiacan. Sorry about my pronunciation. Culiacan, perhaps? Usually I have my students here to fix my pronunciation. Culiacan, that the Seviano was born there, and that he has never been in Seville or any part of Spain, nor in the Gulf of Persia, nor anywhere except here on the Vermilion. Also, that he has had many fights in Culiacan, one of them fatal. I promised my father that I would obey him, but as we walked toward home, I again thought of my dream and the big pearl I had found, and how surprised the Seviano would be when he saw it. All right, so let's go ahead and review quickly the timeline here. We read about this in the last chapter. The beginning of the book starts here in the green square. Ramon, the Seviano, and the Manta Diablo fight to the death. That's what Ramon tells us at the very beginning. But, he says, that's the end of my story. So then we come back over here, and this is where it really starts, right? It starts with Ramon telling us about the Seviano and the Pearl of Heaven. But that event is going to happen way at the end of the book. So in chapter 1, we learn about Ramon's 16th birthday. And Ramon gets to join his father, and they become pearlers together. And then 4 months pass. And then finally, Ramon asks if he can go dive. So here we are now, where Ramon gets to go dive for the pearls, which is very exciting. All right, so the word mahogany, say it with me, mahogany. The boats are made of mahogany, that's the kind of wood. And it's described, the Seviano looks very much like a picture gallery walking around. He has tattoos all over his arms and his back, and it's like a picture gallery. So here is a picture gallery where you would walk around looking at pictures, but there's so many pictures on his body that when you look at his body, it's like looking at a picture gallery. It's the same idea. Okay, the Seviano tells tales. Now, this is not like a dog's tail. That would be Tail. This is tales, like stories. And the Seviano kind of makes these big stories. Oh, I've been all over the world, and I've found the biggest oysters, and I've had the greatest success, and I could have been a rich man. Yeah, right. Okay, Ramon challenges the Seviano and goes, "You're a liar." But then he swallows his pride. Now, we say this swallow. You don't actually swallow anything. You swallow. You take a drink of water. You swallow it down. To swallow your pride is when you're like, "I want to tell you." No. I will swallow my pride. You really want to? You want it? No, you're a liar. No, I'm just gonna not worry about it. Okay, swallow your pride is when you try and shove down that emotion. All right. Goad is when you are prompting, you're moving, you're motivating. So here's a farmer goading his ox, right? Come on, come on. And the Seviano is goading Ramon. Come on, you want to fight? Come on, let's see what you got. Come on, you call me a liar? You call me a liar? So the Seviano tries to goad him into a fight. All right? They are looking for the oyster shells to find the pearls within them. So they got them all stacked up in the boat. All right. It talks about the Burro clam and how the Seviano reached in and then clamp. Oh, it's got me. Okay, this is a Burro clam. It's just a monster. I mean, this thing is just huge. It's this huge animal. Okay? And it kind of sits there with the mouth open a little bit, and then when something comes in, it goes, it'd be very difficult to open it up. So he got his arm stuck, and that's how he has a scar up his arm. Okay, now, Ramon tells us that he got this amazing pearl. Huh? What? Seviano was talking. And Ramon's sitting there after long days, listening. And his mind drifts off and he dreams, kind of a daydream. Because look at these words. A dream began. It was a fanciful dream. I saw myself. And just as I was about to clutch the pearl, what? It didn't really happen. So don't get confused. He did not find the pearl yet. This was a dream. He was sitting there just like, huh? What? Just a dream. So pay attention to these words. It was a dream and a fanciful dream. Okay, now we get the description of the Manta or Manta. Okay, and it's so huge. From tip to tip, this thing can be just gigantic. It talks about the lobes at the front of its mouth, and these things, and they help bring the food into the mouth. The pilot fish, here's a picture of the pilot fish on a manta ray, and it's like a toothbrush. Gets all the food out of its teeth. And he describes it as a fearsome beast. I don't know, do you think that looks fearsome? Maybe. These things are just huge creatures. I think they look absolutely beautiful. But yeah, I might be a little bit scared if I was, in a boat and that huge creature, swam up right next to me. A flick of its wing could send the boat. Mutter, we talked about this word before. When you don't speak very clearly. All right, so what kind of man is the Seviano? Look at some of the passages here. He has never been in Seville. He has had many fights. One of the fights was fatal, which means deadly. So the Seviano has attractive qualities. He is handsome. He has beautiful blue eyes. He is strong. But he's also a liar, and he's mean. He teases Ramon and is annoying. He's also dangerous. He has had many fights. I'm afraid Ramon might try to fight him, and that would be really bad. So when I think of the Seviano, Gaspar Ruiz is his name, I don't like him. He seems like a liar. Plus, we know that at some point, Ramon, the Seviano, and the Manta Diablo are going to fight to the death. So I'm worried for Ramon. I don't know what's going to happen with the Seviano. Okay? Because he's even killed somebody in a fight before. So, all right, ladies and gents, thanks for your attention. We will talk again later.